mode.
Hello, folks. We're going to get our webinar started here in just a few minutes. People are filing in, and this is just an opportunity to test your audio, make sure it works, and we're looking forward to a great session this morning. Good morning, everybody. We're going to give folks another minute here to file in, and we're going to get started with building CRM roadmaps for nonprofits. Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started now with our webinar this morning, Building CRM Roadmap for Nonprofits. Very, very pleased to have you with us this morning. My name is Keith Heller. I'm the founder of Heller Consulting. I have with me Paul Matijevich from Feeding America, and we're very excited to talk to you this morning about this topic. Get our slides going here. A little bit about Heller Consulting. We were founded 20 years ago. We help nonprofits with their technology. We've served over 1,500 clients, 3,000 projects. We work all over the country. We've got a very small but mighty group of people really dedicated to what we do. We all love nonprofits. We've spent a lot of time working in them ourselves before we came into the consulting world. And it's a real pleasure for us to bring that experience and that passion to helping organizations like yours with their technology decisions and implementations. We help people with their CRM systems, so figuring out what they should, what's the right choice for them, and then implementing those systems with your business practices so that your teams work really well together and you really optimize your technology choices. And then, of course, the reason that we adopt technology as nonprofits is so that we can connect with our community. So we help with those strategies and initiatives. We've had the pleasure of working with some just fantastic organizations, a number of whom are actually, folks from these organizations are on the call today, so we thank you for joining us. This is just a small sample of the organizations, the type of organizations we have the pleasure to work with. And finally, one of our goals is beyond helping the clients that we are able to work with ourselves, we want the fruits of our efforts and experience to be shared widely. This is sort of a social mission of ours. And so we do that primarily through the white papers that we write, which you'll find at teamheller.com/resources. We have many papers on the topic of CRM, on Salesforce itself, and on engagement strategy. So I really encourage and invite you to look at those papers and hopefully reap some benefits from them. So we're going to dive in here and talk about the CRM vision. This is where CRM roadmaps start. So what does that mean, the CRM vision? A lot of folks, when they think of CRM, of course the phrase, the acronym stands for Constituent Relationship Management. And most people, when they think of that, they think of a piece of software. Well, this next slide shows for many organizations their current state relative to CRM. So we hear from many, many organizations, oh my gosh, my data, my information, all my constituents, it's spread out all over the place. It's completely siloed. And this has a strong impact. So let's talk about this a little bit and what we can do to rectify that. The impact of everything being in silos is that your organization is quite disconnected. It's disconnected internally, and it's disconnected from your constituents. And what happens is, if you think of each of these circles here as a department or a database or something, you have the same people in all those systems. And yet, there's no coordination in the way that those folks are communicated with and treated, and so there's miscommunications, there's missed opportunities. I think we've all heard of or experienced, the same person, the same constituent getting multiple emails from multiple departments, and it tends to look like the left hand and the right hand at your organization don't know what they're doing, they're not in sync. And this leads to an erosion of trust, and it's difficult to build the full meaningful relationship that's possible. This is the impact of not having a unified vision and systems. So how do we get to that sort of promised land around CRM? Well, the place that we start is not with technology itself. We don't start with, hey, what system should we buy, and let's change and move off of our old databases onto something new. No, the place that we start is we start with the constituents themselves. And we put down our technology hats and we pick up our strategy hats and our own experience as constituents at organizations. And we think, for our organization, how do we want to relate to those constituents? What do we want that experience to be for them when they relate to us? When they come to our website, when they call, when they come to an event, when they experience our organization, what do we want that experience to be for our constituents? And we have to sort of set up those tent posts. How do we want them to relate to us, to each other, so that overall we can expand the impact of our mission, right? Because that's the ultimate goal. So this is really very strategic thinking, and it puts the constituent in the center of the experience, and it talks about the constituent before we talk about technology. Now, once we have articulated those goals and values and sometimes tactics, then we can turn our attention back to technology and say, okay, if this is what we've articulated as our goals, then we can make our technology decisions based on those values and goals and that CRM vision. So how do we get from that CRM vision to it being actualized? That is the purpose of the CRM Roadmap. So a CRM Roadmap, it's an opportunity. It's three things. It's an opportunity to articulate that vision. When you go into a CRM Roadmap process, that's one of the things that your organization will do, is it will sit down to have those conversations about how you want your constituents to be treated. And that visioning happens first, and it's very, very important because it sets the stage for change in your organization, and Paul's going to be talking about change later and how important it is to manage change, help people transition. When you present that vision, it's a North Star for your organization's efforts. And of course, it has strategic value to have that orientation, but it also has a lot of practical value as you move through the process of change and moving into a CRM environment. All technology projects come with them a lot of change, and with change for most of us people, there comes some excitement, but also some anxiety. And somewhere along the way, we all ask ourselves, why are we doing this? And the CRM vision reminds us, well, this is why we're making the effort that we're making. Right? So it's an opportunity, CRM Roadmap is an opportunity to articulate that vision. Part of that is also a process within your organization of collaboration and socializing that CRM vision and socializing the CRM project as a whole. And you'll see in a minute that there's multiple components to a roadmap, and so the CRM Roadmap is also a process for introducing people to the project and to its reasons, but also practically what it means. And it's a chance for, out of that roadmap process, will come a practical plan for achieving your CRM vision. And you're going to see some examples of that as well. So, but it's important to note, it's not just strategy, and it's not just change management. It's not just a plan. It's all three of those elements are the benefits of going through a CRM roadmap. So what is it? Well, a CRM roadmap is ultimately a set of deliverables, it's documents, it's PowerPoints, it's Excel spreadsheets, it's this whole suite of things, decision-making tools, and the results of those decision-making processes. And it's a little bit like having a book. There's multiple chapters, and you see here listed on the left, probably a dozen or more potential chapters for your CRM roadmap. Not every organization needs every chapter. It depends on where you are as an organization in your thinking with your technology and the particular goals and path you're going to take for realizing your CRM vision. So while these are possibilities, you'll choose from among those the ones that are most important to you. And I've highlighted 5 of them here that do end up being core to almost every CRM roadmap. And then the other ones get added in depending on, again, your particular needs. So the first one is CRM vision. We just talked about that a bit and how you, some of the conversations that you step back and have for that. Let's talk also about why do you do the CRM roadmap. So there's a lot of questions that come up for people when they hear, hey, we're going to adopt new engagement strategies with our constituents. We're going to adopt new technology to enable those strategies. And these are the questions. Well, what are we going to be doing? And who's going to do this? And how? And when is that going to happen? And of course, we want to always have at the center the why, which is why we craft that CRM vision, because ultimately that is the key question everyone should be asking. Why are we doing this? And are we doing it for the right reasons? And are we aligned around that? And then the CRM roadmap helps answer all these other pieces as well as you go through the more detailed planning process. So we start with the CRM vision that I just talked about, and then we move deeper. So the first of those pieces that you'll work with is a phased adoption approach. This is because moving to this CRM environment that supports the CRM vision, this is not something one does in a single project. Most organizations currently have many, many different departments and data systems scattered around. And it isn't usually possible nor advisable to try and bring all of that together in a single project and retire all those old systems and change all your business practices and align all of your strategies. It simply isn't really feasible to do that. So instead, you take a phased approach, and I'm going to show you an example here. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit about what questions one answers to determine what order to phase things. But it's important to know going in that for most organizations, it took many years, often a decade or more, to kind of get you into the situation you're in relative to how many systems you have and departments, et cetera. And so it takes, a couple of years and a couple phases at least to get one out of it in a really thoughtful and effective manner. So let me share with you a few slides from a national federated multi-chapter nonprofit that we worked with to help them on this process. And of course, the first engagement that we did with them was to develop the CRM roadmap and then subsequently to implement based on that. So this is what things looked like. This was sort of their before slide. They had, you'll see in the top left, a legacy CRM. It was a very large system with managing about 40 different chapters around the country. They had a total of 110 chapters and entities that they had to manage. And so there was one system that had a lot of them. And yet, at the same time, you see on the left, the chapter CRM systems, that there's, I think, 7 dots there, but in fact, there are about 600 data sources spread across the balance of those 70 organizations. So there was a lot going on. Another key system was their general ledger. And then on the right, you see, on the top right, they had many, many, many different websites, both websites for content and then websites for their fundraising events. They did a lot of walks. They had many different donation pages and email systems and such, and this was having a single brand and a single workflow, a single set of data. All this was quite challenging to them, and it was challenging both from the back office perspective, but it was also challenging to their constituents to have a clear and unified experience. And then down on the bottom right, their missions and programs groups were further separated, even though the people who benefited from their missions and programs were quite often fundraisers as well through their walks. And of course, those that weren't, they and their families were wonderful prospects for supporting the organization because they'd really benefited from it. So a soft ask and a thoughtful way of approaching those people could really yield a lot for the organization. So their goal was to design a strategy that allowed them to develop deeper and more personalized relationships with all these folks, and to move to technology that really allowed them to do that. And so the first piece in this CRM roadmap was to say, well, what of our systems are we going to change first so that we can start to realize those benefits in our relationship? So they decided that they'd have, at the end of their phase one, and you'll see another phase after this, at the end of their phase one, their goal was that their online presence on the top right would be deeply consolidated because that was the main way that they were engaging with their constituents, raising funds to support the mission, and it was the primary area for growth. They were not trying to grow their direct mail program, let's say. They were trying to grow more online. And so that meant for them that the key area to try and consolidate was in all those bubbles on the top right online. It also, they wanted a tighter integration with their core CRM system so that that CRM system could become the single source of truth. Now, in order to do that, they had to move off their legacy technology on the CRM and into a new environment that had more flexibility in the information that is stored and how it reported it, how it integrated with their online presence, and really started to deliver on that promise that we all want to deliver on, which is the unified view of the constituent. Meaning that when I go into a record for a constituent, I have that elusive and exciting 360-degree view, so I can see, oh, this person is a donor. They also receive and open the emails. They take advocacy action online. They participate. They've also been beneficiary of our mission. And so having these things connected, they needed a new CRM to do that. So the first phase was adopting that new CRM and moving that core database of 40 affiliates into that new CRM environment, bringing those 600 databases out of those chapter systems and into that new CRM, and moving to consolidating their online presence and integrating it. And then there was some light work around missions and programs to tie in some of that data into the CRM. The general ledger stayed the same. And quite often, when you're doing these kinds of projects, the GL does not need to change. Its role is clearly defined. The data that moves to the GL is clearly defined around the financials. And as long as the CRM is established in a way that it serves as a subledger of the general ledger and meets your accounting department's concerns and valid concerns around meeting IRS guidelines, you don't need to mess with the general ledger at the same time. And I say that to kind of hopefully relieve you of a sense of how vast this has to be. It can be targeted to those systems that deal with your constituents directly. So for them, their final vision was to bring, you'll notice what's changed here, the missions and programs systems. There aren't separate databases that do that anymore. Instead, that's all brought into the CRM. So that essentially any engagement activity with the constituents in a traditional sense, offline sense, and some online because they adopted an online-based CRM, is happening out of that core CRM. And then online presence continues to have additional tools to do that because websites are separate from the CRM. And of course, online is where, and in the social arena, is where we see the greatest innovation happening. So that at this time, while online CRMs or SaaS systems are increasingly making available to us easy tools to integrate into the website or even publish out of the CRM, publish donation pages and such. And the line between CRM and CMS or web systems is blurring a bit. Nonetheless, online is evolving so quickly that we're always going to have, at this point, systems for our online and social engagement that are separate from our CRMs and therefore will continue to be integrated. But you'll notice here, this is what we database geeks would say a pretty elegant architecture. And elegant in the sense that it's clean and consolidated and simpler. And just for a minute, I'll go back to the first phase so that you can remember sort of the before. So this is the after, and this is the before. And so just, even if everything I just said kind of flew by you, what's important is just the visual. You go from a very complicated, cluttered architecture to something much simpler and streamlined. And even intuitively, we can tell this is simply going to be easier for us to work with. And if it's easier for us to work with, quite likely our constituents are going to have an easier experience also, and it's going to be simpler for us to give our constituents a more positive experience. So that's the multi-phase. And how do we decide where to start? You know, if we look at that phase one and all those different systems they had, you know, we have to start somewhere. So how do you make those decisions? Well, you ask yourself these key questions. What are my best opportunities for doing better by my constituents? What would they most appreciate? What is going to help develop, solidify my relationships with my constituents, and those ideally would be where one gets to start. Sometimes where we have to start is where the primary pain is for our organization. Maybe there's something that we're not necessarily getting to aim for our strategic goals right away. Instead, we have to put out some fires. That also can happen. And so where the primary pain is can influence our choices where to start. Sometimes there's a short course to some benefits, and that may influence. Sometimes there's greatest impact. And then there's establishing the foundation for future success. And this is, I'm not referring here so much to a technical foundation as more actually a change management and a political foundation. Sometimes you choose a project that, while it may not be the biggest and it may not be the greatest impact or the greatest pain, nonetheless, it's a part of your organization that, if they changed, would say great things about what it means for them to change systems, move to a CRM strategy, and that's important in the context of your organization for getting other people enthusiastic. So it's never the case that one decides where to start based on just one of these questions. It's always a matrix decision. It's always a conversation between these different questions and your responses to them. But it is very helpful to move through them in a thoughtful way and articulate your responses for each of your key departments and constituencies. And then through that dialogue, you get the practical effect of something coming to the surface as the clear place to start. But also, it's important, those conversations are important because you're engaging multiple stakeholders in your organization and they're becoming part of the process already. And that's really important for change management, because in the end, you can put in place new strategies and new systems, but if no one adopts them, it's simply not going to happen. You need to get people in your organization on board, and to do that, they need to feel part of the process. Now, if you imagine that your organization, let's say, has 5 departments, that might be twice as many as you have, it might be half as many as you have. But if you are going to start with one department for CRM, That means you're not going to start with a bunch of others. And yet, those other folks may have to make effort as part of the project to contribute to it. They may have to contribute some of their data. They may have to change some of their business practices as that first department's practices change. So they're going to want to understand, well, why am I being asked to change? Why do I have to change what I do and make that effort? Well, if they've been part of the process of conversation around what's important to your organization, what's important to your constituents, they can understand better. I'm not guaranteeing, but they can understand better why a certain department or group is going first, and they are asked to support that. And when there's a phased adoption plan, they should see somewhere in those phases their own part of the organization also making that transition, starting to reap those benefits. And of course, you'll have some people in the organization who are very happy not to go first as well, and that will influence your decision. So key considerations, this is essentially another way of looking at those questions. You know, where can you get high impact or high urgency? Where are your systems at currently? Some people say our CRM plan is to get off A, B, or C system before it crashes and fails us. Okay, well, that's something we really have to consider. And then organization readiness, you know, in the case of this organization, well, we were weaving in and out of their walk event schedule. So that's very important. Or some people have every other year huge conference that they throw. Well, that's going to influence the project. So that's sort of phasing, and that's a cornerstone to figure out. Then there's the platform and system architecture. Now, for those of you who are less technically oriented, just look at the pictures. In fact, the next few slides really are just some pictures, and I don't dive into the architecture itself except some visuals here for context. So here's this is the first of two organizations I'll show you. When we came into the organization, we kind of mapped out their current architecture, what systems they had, how those systems related. If you can't see all the words on the screen, it's not important. What's important is this is the before, and this is the after. Okay. Before, a lot of different systems, different arrows moving back and forth. Some of those mean automated integrations. Some are manual, quote-unquote, integrations. You'll see at the top they have a website with a lot of different pieces to it. But in the end, we aimed at a much more, again, elegant solution. Now, it's not to say, this is not to cast aspersions on what came before. Most people end up with environments that look like this, not out of planning or the lack of a desire to plan, but simply the accumulation of different tools and systems over time. And so it's not intentional. No one sets out to plan something like this, but it happens, and then every once in a while you get the opportunity, like a CRM project like this, to kind of reset, right, and aim at something more elegant and more streamlined. Another difference here is that the technologies available to nonprofits have improved, so that what had to be, out of necessity, more complicated in the past, no longer has to be. Right, so this is another example here. There's a lot of different systems on the page, a lot of arrows, websites, fundraising software, GL, custom databases, and then this is the architecture these folks are moving towards. It's much simpler. They have the website, CRM, the general ledger. That's actually the same basic architecture as the phased implementation that I showed you earlier. So one of the things you'll notice is that within the CRM, they have a lot of different little boxes, which is different departments or functions. And before, those were spread out in different areas. So again, moving from something complicated, probably a result of the limits of the technology at the time that they first adopted these systems and the accumulation of different systems over time, to now, because of the technology that's available, moving into a simpler environment and doing it, again, with the aim of better serving constituents. It's not just technology for technology's sake, but to enable that CRM vision. So finally, last little bit I'm going to talk about here, and then I'll turn it over to Paul just a single slide on implementation plan. Every phase will have within it a plan for realizing the goals of that particular phase. And that implementation plan, this actually comes from Paul in Feeding America, has steps within it, a discovery process where you really dive deeply into the goals of a particular department. You dive deeply into technologies. You plan and analyze how you're going to make changes and what needs to change. You design the future environment to build out and configure that new environment, move data into it, test, and then last, deliver that final environment and stabilize and start to realize your strategies and act on them. And this process is repeated in each phase, so it becomes familiar. So with that, I'd like to say just briefly about change management and communication. Change management is the people portion of the project. So we can talk about technology and we talk about project management, but in the end, it all comes down to people. It's the people you're doing the work for ultimately, which is your constituents, and it's the people who are getting the work done, which is everyone in your organization. In a true broad CRM initiative, everyone in your organization will be affected in some way and asked to contribute in some way to realizing that vision. And so change management is the process of helping them through the project so that they can help you get the project done. So with that, I'd like to ask Paul to take over and talk to us a little bit about what change management is like at Feeding America.
Thank you so very much, Keith. I wanted to reference back to one of the earliest slides in this deck, which was the image of all of the silos on the farm and how that really resonates with Feeding America simply because one of our fundraising initiatives is Invest an Acre. And so we have a lot of contact with farmers around the country to see those silos. So I thought that was pretty amusing from our perspective. Thanks, everybody. Today, I wanted to focus a little bit, as Keith had said, about how we, with Heller's help through this process, have been navigating and negotiating the implementation of our CRM. Heller has been our strategic and lead implementation partner with this whole time. This journey for us has been well over a year and really targeting the late spring, early summer of next year for implementation of our new CRM. I think one of the things that has been said throughout the course of this presentation has been the importance of the incorporation and the intermingling of change throughout the course of the roadmap. And thanks to Heller's advice and help and our efforts, we've been able to build a fairly robust structure of change management to surround this CRM project. And it has really served us well as we've gone through the various pieces of the phases of the project. From the previous slide, Keith had shown where we had our kind of major 6 phases, and change management really is somewhat in that overarching phase. If you saw there was an arrow or a chevron that talked about manage, we look at change management being a part of all of it, because through every one of the phases we're dealing with how we're implementing change, how people are affected by what we're doing, and ensuring that we're communicating what we're doing effectively throughout the organization. Just a second about me. So my role, my title is very interesting here. It's the Director of New Process Implementation, and I serve somewhat of a dual purpose here. It's helping to facilitate change for the organization. It's helping to lead the project, and really in many cases it's helping to evangelize what we're trying to do and make sure that people understand what our goals and aspirations are with this project and what we're going to try to achieve. So if you could advance to the next slide there, Keith. So this slide talks about a readiness exercise that we undertook as part of the effort in the early phases of the project. So in the discovery and plan and analyze phase, as part of discovering everything that needed to be done, all of our hopes and dreams and aspirations with this project. Built into that was a whole set of criteria that also phased in what was the change that was going to be necessary to make this successful at Feeding America. What tools were we going to need to implement to ensure that we've communicated effectively, people understand what we're doing, people have bought into the message, and there are a number of very tangible things that we focused on trying to do through the course of this. But what was, I think, really key to this and this project readiness assessment that we engaged in was ensuring that we had the necessary plumbing in place so that as we went into the very detailed components of the project that we're in now that we're building the system, we're configuring the system, that the mechanisms around communication and change are just happening. They're second nature to us. They occur on a weekly and monthly basis like clockwork, and people are expecting and understand and are reassured by the fact that those mechanisms are occurring on a regular basis. Now, I don't want to minimize the effort that goes into that. There was a very, and there has been and continues to be a very conscious effort that we keep these mechanisms running through the course of our project, but we're reaping benefits from having them in place because we have engaged stakeholders. We have implementation partners who understand what's going on with our project. We have executive leadership that can look at our project and say, we understand what you're trying to do here, and we see that you're on track, and we understand what our ultimate goals were. Keith, if you could go to the next slide for me. I want to talk a little bit here. This slide is really detailed. It's a snapshot off of the public-facing website that we created for the project. But I want to step back a moment about kind of the key elements about change that we defined. And those really encompassed the creation of a governance structure and a governance model, the creation of communication tools that allow us to regularly touch base with everyone. And that's from this particular website that's updated on a weekly or bi-weekly basis with information about what's happening and where we're at and what's going on, to monthly meetings that occur with all of our governance partners, all of our governance committees, to status reports that go out weekly, to 3 to 5 times a week project touch bases that occur, the creation of a project management information system that we stood up that essentially serves as a wiki and allows all of the project team members to contribute to it, but and all of our implementation partners are engaged in that. And it's a place for all of us to go to say, well, what's happening with this particular integration, or where are we at in this particular component of the data mapping? We go to that wiki and we can always find information there, and we drive everyone there, and we use it for all of our project assets and for all of our project agenda components. And I think one of the most important pieces of the communication that occurred, and Keith talked about this a little bit before, about distilling kind of the vision of what we wanted to try to achieve, was with the creation of the project charter. And the charter we'll talk about in a few minutes, but we look at that charter as really a key piece of the communication strategy as well, because it's the vision document. It said, this is what we wanted to try to achieve. Now let's take a look at that and then roll everything off of that to say, how is all of this going to fit into these elements? In that project charter, we defined a sequence of what we call transformational opportunities. And so everything we do now sorts of rolls up into those transformational opportunities. And we can always point to the tasks that we're working on to say, this re-engineering of business processes we're doing here, that was part of our charter. This creation of a better view of all of our constituents. And in one of Keith's earlier slides, he had this aggregation of kind of the constituent at the center of that hub. And yes, so we're looking to try to see a complete profile of our constituent. And how do we do that? This work feeds immediately into that element from the charter. So in the Hungernet page that you see here, as I said, we talk about what's happening now, what to expect. Everyone on the staff can go and take a look at this at any time. The quick links that are on the right nav of this page essentially talk about what's happening in the phases. You can go and take a look at the completed deliverables that we've had there. We load them up there in PDF form so that people can see them. We also have our definitions of our governance structure here with our executive committee, which is our projects, our executive project sponsor, our steering committee, which is comprised of folks from across the organization in leadership roles. These are people at the vice president level throughout the organization. Our advisory committee, which are really the boots on the ground, I call them. That's the committee that I lead, and it's really about the tactics and the action on a regular basis with these stakeholders and how it's impacting and affecting them. And then the project team and the partners all roll up into that as well and work very closely with our advisory committee members, with our steering committee members, and also regularly talking to our executive sponsor that way. Something I just want to mention to you about this and the creation of this infrastructure and plumbing for us was, it is a first in my career at doing these kinds of projects, and that is having an executive sponsor say in a public meeting with all of the stakeholders how important it is for our annual goals to have adoption of a CRM as one of those goals for everyone engaged in this project, meaning 50 plus people in this organization. And that is something that's coming down now. So what that tells me organizationally, that we have achieved what we wanted to do with our communications plan in getting everyone to understand the importance of what the CRM implementation is going to be to Feeding America. Keith, could you move to the next slide, please? So here's a larger view of kind of what our governance structure looks like and what's engaged in that. I mentioned a little bit about who's involved in our executive and our steering and advisory committee. Our project sponsor, John Vega, he's kind of, we list him here kind of as the central hub of this, because truly John Vega serves as the evangelist for this project going forward and communicating up and out to all parts of the organization on a regular basis. The other thing we developed as part of this whole change management process is a change control structure, so that not only during the project but post-project, as we continue these committees, we know how we can manage change as it goes through the process here at Feeding America. So when initiatives come up, do we make the decision as a project team? Does the advisory committee make that decision? Does the steering committee or the executive committee make that decision, and how that gets routed? That graphic, albeit small, really serves us very well because, again, it touches everybody. Everyone involved has the ability of being able to come and have a say or be able to see in a transparent way what we're trying to accomplish with this project. So that has also been an opportunity for us to help us manage some of the key elements, such as what's in scope and what's out of scope. How is budget going to be impacted here? How potentially timeline might be impacted. Keith mentioned a little bit ago in the presentation the idea of, you know, how we're phasing. What's a phase 1 element? What's a phase 2 element? Our change control process is what we use to help facilitate that information. So, Keith, if you could move on to the next one, please. This we use just as sort of a draft of the communications plan. I alluded a little bit to this earlier about how the regular communications with the project team, kind of the daily meetings, if you will, some technical, some functional, the project information system, management information system we created to help facilitate communications, the regular status updates that we have with the with our close-in organization, meaning our advisory and steering committee and executive committee members, the quarterly meetings that we have where reporting goes on, also to kind of our executive implementation partners. Keith came to Feeding America last week, or excuse me, 2 weeks ago, where we had the second of our executive implementation partner meetings, where the leaders of the folks who are involved in this met with John and I to talk through those high-level elements, those transformational opportunities, and also to talk about where we're at with this project and make sure that we all, as individuals involved in this, as partners involved in this, are aligned in terms of our direction. From an organizational perspective, we have our website, which is available for folks. We communicate at our regular staff meetings about it. On a monthly basis, we have what we call a standing meeting for the staff. We always have a moment there, or a few moments, where we can talk about the status of the project and what's going on. And then in general, the idea about external communications to folks who this is affecting. So that is handled, again, in a more public way through our executive team, who communicates to food banks that might be affected and others that might be affected this way. So, and then to the last slide, if you would, Keith. I alluded to this before about the charter, and really, Keith mentioned this earlier, defining the vision for this project and the goals that we've had to create this comprehensive view of our constituents. It's really aggregating all of those disparate systems, all of those silos we had, to allow us to have a system of record for our constituents, so we can see not just offline giving information and some basic constituent information, but all of the touch points here in one place, and people can look at that and feel confident about a holistic view of our donors, and also allow them the opportunity for us to increase and develop more robust segmentation and solicitation opportunities going forward. All of these other pieces with processes, policies, procedures, the governance, and all of that, again, the plumbing, and then also part of the transformational opportunities that are fleshed out further in the charter, where we're seeing these new processes help us to facilitate what we're going to do from a fundraising perspective. Accessibility to systems and information, and how that affects us overall in terms of our success. And so, again, that concept of really getting a vision crafted initially and early on in the process allows it to roll down then to processes that will happen, to the tactical plan that will happen, and allows us, as we're in the midst of the chaos of a project, which is right now, to be able to grasp onto these things and know that we have these regular systems in place to be able to rely on, and know that in our ability to communicate this way to our stakeholders, that they feel really reassured that the project is moving forward in an effective way, that we're addressing risk in an effective way, and that we're managing effectively to these goals that we outlined early on. So that's what I have about change management and its how it's impacting and affecting Feeding America at this point.
Paul, this is really this is fantastic what you all have developed, and I really appreciate you sharing it here. Folks, if you have questions for us, you have a chat window, and we have several minutes here to stay and take questions. I'll note while you're maybe submitting those that you know, what Paul and his colleagues have developed is very robust, and for many organizations, it is in fact what they need. It can look like a lot of homework to develop the committee structure, the decision-making process, the communications. But what we've seen at many projects is that you can either think about it up front and be prepared, or you can try to figure it out on the fly in response to people's requests for information, for lack of clarity about decisions and who's supposed to make which decisions. You can be trying to figure that out in the middle of the project, in the middle of the quote-unquote chaos. So it works a lot better to figure out in advance. Now, what I would say is, for some organizations on the call today, you may not need as much of a structure. You may not have as many committees. You may not have an intranet site. You might have emails instead. You might use other communications tools. So it might scale down a bit. for your organization, so you don't have to feel intimidated that you have to do all that Paul has done. But the basic underpinnings are really, really important.
I'd like to say one other thing to this, and this is really a shout out to Heller and their strategy and support of the concepts here, and ongoing support of what we've tried to build and achieve and kind of continuing to manage. That right from the get-go with working with Heller and creating our CRM roadmap and strategizing how we're going to approach this and our readiness for this. This discussion that Keith led about the importance of this integration of managing change early on, I think really affected us, and I think really helped codify for us that this was critical for an organization like Feeding America to put in place to ensure that we could be successful. So thank you, Keith, for both your input and your team's input on this ongoing basis with us to help support this model, because without you, we wouldn't have all of this in place. And so.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's very kind, and it was also selfish on our part, because we needed to do a good project together. You have to, you have to work these things out. So just had a couple questions come in, and they're of similar flavors. So I'll note that the recording of the webinars can be provided to all the registrants. So we'll be emailing you out a link with that. And a link to our resources in general and to the change management paper. And with that, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for attending today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. And, if you have any questions about what we've discussed today, please do contact us. We hope you'll take advantage of the resources that we provide as well. So thank you very much. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.